Dünyaca ünlü iktisatçı Timothy Ash'e göre bu yıl Türk ekonomisinden umutlu olmak için nedenler var.
We are optimistic. We are invested. We've been invested in Turkish credit.
Hükümetin uyguladığı enflasyonla mücadele programı ve ortodoks politikalara dönüş yurt dışı ekonomi çevrelerinde takdirle karşılanıyor. Ancak yabancı aktörlere göre halen hükümetin atması gereken adımlar var.
So Eurobonds of companies and banks. The question is whether we invest in lira assets. That's a different issue. It's not only the durability of the orthodox policy in the team, but it's are you getting paid enough in terms of Turk government bonds? I mean, they pay 20-odd%. Is that enough to offset for inflation? So that's the institutional investors are asking that question then.
Dolar bazında ucuzlayan TL cinsinden finansal varlıklara yatırımcı çekmek hükümetin önceliklerinden. Bununla beraber ekonomi yönetimi doğrudan yatırım getirebilmek için son dönemde bir dizi girişimlerde bulundu. Türkiye'nin yatırımcı çekme potansiyeli olduğunu düşünen Timothy Ash'e göre mevcut politikanın devamı yabancı yatırımcı için kritik olacak.
Turkey has lots of interesting projects, I think potentially lots of interesting business opportunities. So I think this long-term investment from the Gulf will come because I think ultimately Turkey has lots of positives in terms of its things that attract investors to us. So I think the Gulf money will ultimately come, yes. As long as Mehmet Şimşek is allowed to continue with his very good policy changes that he's rolling out.
Ekonomist Timothy Ash'e göre Körfez ülkelerinden beklenen yatırımlar zamana yayılarak gelecek.
I think if maybe the UAE wrote a check for 51 billion and gave it to Turkey, without conditionality, I mean, maybe there'd be some concern that there'd be scope for Turkey to go back on the policy changes we've seen. So I think, they're not stupid. The rulers of the Gulf regimes, they're very logical, practical. It's their money, they've earned it, they want to get it paid back with a return. They want to make sure they're investing in the right place with the right policies. So you can understand their caution and their dispersing the money over maybe an extended period of time.
Jeopolitik riskler hakkında da konuşan Ash, doların halen güçlü bir para birimi olduğuna dikkat çekiyor. Ash'e göre yaptırım siyasetleriyle Rusya'nın askeri kompleksi zayıflatılmalı.
Sanctions are not a silver bullet. They're one tool in the Western's armory. We have an interest in the West, I think, in weakening Russia because Russia is a threat. It's invaded Ukraine. It's been a bad global player. Intervention in Syria, into Georgia, Transnistria, plenty of places. We want that to stop. It's a threat to us. It's a threat to the Western system of Western liberal market democracy. We need to weaken Russia's military-industrial complex, so sanctions have to remain in place. That's the reality.
But Cameron says something else. You're just using Ukrainians, you're just letting them to fight and die for the advantage of the US and Britain.
Well, I can't comment on what he said. I didn't hear the phrase, but look, the reality is Ukrainians are dying to defend us. That's a fact. They're fighting to defend themselves, their own country, but Ukraine is the front line for Poland, for the Baltic states, for Western Europe. If Putin wins in Ukraine, he'll go further. He'll do more stuff. So yeah, you're right. I mean, Cameron's point was that we need to do more to support the Ukrainians because they're not just defending themselves, they're defending us. That's a fact.
Amerika Birleşik Devletleri seçimleriyle ilgili de Harici'ye değerlendirmede bulunan Ash, Donald Trump'ın jeopolitik bir risk olduğunu öne sürdü.
I am pretty worried. I mean, climate change, what we're seeing, the lack of I'm not particularly an environmental specialist, but it must be clear to everyone, right? Climate change, climate crisis, every year is getting more difficult. We have the US presidential election, Trump coming in. That's probably the biggest. I did a survey on my Twitter account, biggest risk, geopolitical risk next year. I think the biggest number was the Trump presidency, what that means. US, the US, I'm British. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the US. But, is the world, an isolationist US, the US that withdraws from international diplomacy? Is that actually a good thing? It's probably. We can criticize the US in many places, like the Middle East, in terms of policy. But if it steps back, it's less multilateralism.